He lost his home before the snow fell, lost his place before the cold arrived. As night closed in and the temperature dropped fast, a man and his dog walked toward the edge of town. Then the dog stopped, body tense, refusing to move. Beside the silent tracks, they saw it. An abandoned rail car, cold and forgotten. Was it shelter? Or the last mistake he would ever make? What he found inside would test everything he believed about survival, dignity, and trust. And what happened during the storm that followed would change more than just his life. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Winter pressed against the town like a held breath. The air carried the dry sting of coming snow, and the late afternoon light lay thin and gray across the peeling siding of an aging boarding house at the edge of the rail district. Caleb Monroe had learned to read weather the way some men read faces, not from farmers or fishermen, but from long nights overseas when the sky decided whether men lived or died. This kind of cold, quiet, tightening meant something was about to break. The room he rented was small but deliberate, shaped by habit rather than comfort. A narrow bed against the wall, a metal chair by the window, boots aligned beneath it, tools cleaned and stacked in a milk crate. Everything had a place. Nothing was left unfinished. That was how he kept the noise out of his head. Ash lay near the doorway, his body stretched long but alert. His muzzle had begun to gray around the eyes, giving him the look of a soldier who had seen too much and learned when not to move. One ear tilted toward the hall, the other toward Caleb. He watched without staring. He waited without tension. The knock came suddenly. 2 sharp raps. Not angry, not kind. Official. Ash rose before Caleb did. Caleb noticed that first. He always did. He stood, smoothed his hands on his jeans, and opened the door. Sarah Whitcomb waited in the narrow hallway, a clipboard pressed flat against her chest. She was tall and slightly stooped, her posture shaped by years of managing other people's problems without ever owning them. Her hair, once blonde, had faded to a dry, pale shade and was pulled back into a tight bun that exposed the sharp planes of her face. Fine lines marked her forehead and mouth, not from laughter, but from restraint. She did not step inside. "Caleb," she said, then paused, as if choosing which version of herself to use. "We need to talk." Ash stood beside Caleb now, not blocking the door, just present. His gaze fixed on Sarah's hands. "The owner reviewed the lease," Sarah said, her fingers tightening slightly on the clipboard. "There's been a reassessment." Caleb leaned against the frame, grounding himself. "Of what?" "Risk." She glanced down the hall once, then back. "Insurance issues, the dog, larger breeds raise premiums." Ash's ears lowered a fraction. He did not growl. "And," Sarah added quickly, "the rent is increasing, effective immediately, 6 months paid in advance." 6 months. Caleb felt the response rise in him, sharp, rehearsed, the kind meant for command. It reached his chest before he stopped it. He swallowed it back down, letting silence do the work instead. "There's someone else," he said. Sarah hesitated. "Just long enough." "Yes." He nodded once, acceptance without surrender. The movement felt old in his body. "So, this is notice." Sarah's mouth tightened. "You have until tonight." Tonight. The word carried more weight than it should have. Not because he hadn't slept worse places. He had. But this room had been a pause. A place where nothing detonated, where no one shouted his name over noise. "I kept the place clean," Caleb said. It wasn't a defense, just a fact. "I know," Sarah said. Her voice softened, and for a moment she looked at the room behind him, the order, the care. "You always did." Ash shifted closer to Caleb's leg, his flank brushing against him once, steady and deliberate. "He's well trained," Sarah offered, her eyes dropping to the dog. "Yes," Caleb said. "So were most of us." The sentence landed heavier than he intended. Sarah flinched, though she didn't know why. She had never asked about the war. He had never explained. "I'm sorry," she said. Caleb nodded. "You don't have to be." When the door closed, the hallway returned to its usual sounds. Pipes ticking, a cough somewhere down the line, the distant metallic sigh of rail cars settling. Caleb remained still for a moment longer than necessary, letting the quiet reassert itself. He turned to Ash and exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, quieter now, "guess we're moving." Ash's tail tapped the floor once, not pleased, not upset. Ready? Packing was efficient, clothes folded into a duffel, tools wrapped in canvas. The photograph inside the closet stopped him. He hesitated, then slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket without looking at it. Some things were easier carried unseen. He reached for a heavy winter coat draped over the chair. His hand rested there a moment longer than needed. Then he folded it carefully and left it on the bed. Ash watched all of it. By the time the light thinned and the first snow began to fall, the room was empty. Caleb slung the duffel over his shoulder, lifted the crate, and paused at the threshold. For a brief moment, he wondered if this was how it felt to leave a life rather than a place. Outside, the air had sharpened. Ash stepped into the cold and inhaled deeply, ears turning toward the rail yard, where steel and silence waited. Caleb locked the door out of habit, then slid the key into the mailbox slot anyway. They walked without destination, past darkened windows, past people who did not look up. A man and his dog were easy to miss when they weren't asking for anything. As the wind rose and the sound of trains carried through the cold, Ash aligned his stride with Caleb's without being told. Caleb did not know yet where they would sleep. He only knew that this was not the first contract broken without warning, and it would not be the last retreat he survived. The cold morning came through the town, the way bad news always did, quietly, without urgency in its voice, as if no one wanted to be responsible for how serious it was. A paper notice taped crookedly to the door of the closed general store, a radio crackling from somewhere inside a diner already shuddering for the night. Temperatures expected to drop sharply after sunset, colder than forecast, dangerous for exposure. Caleb read none of it directly. He felt it instead, in the tightening of the air and the way sound carried too clearly, stripped of softness. This was not the kind of cold that crept in gently. This was the kind that corrected mistakes. He did not stop moving when he reached the edge of the rail district, but he slowed, instinctively recalibrating. The civilian part of town was pulling inward, lights dimming, doors closing early, footsteps quickening as people retreated into warmth they trusted. No one lingered. No one asked questions. Caleb did not look for a place to ask for help. That habit had been burned out of him years ago. You didn't ask unless you were prepared for the answer to be no. And tonight, no would not just mean inconvenience. It would mean exposure. Ash stayed close at his side, his pace steady but watchful. The dog's breath fogged in short bursts, controlled. His tail hung low, not tucked, just efficient. This was working weather, dangerous weather. Ash knew the difference. They moved past the last of the boarding houses and into the open margin where town loosened its grip and industry took over. The rail yard spread ahead in long, dark lines, tracks running parallel into distance, freight cars sitting dormant like massive animals at rest. Steel creaked as it cooled, wind slid unhindered across open ground. Caleb adjusted his collar against the rising wind, then stopped himself. That reflex, small adjustments, forward motion, endure and adapt, had worked once, in other places, under different rules. This night required something else. He paused near a chain-link fence, scanning the yard with a professional eye. Not hope, assessment, structures that blocked wind, elevation off ground, shadows where heat might linger longer than expected. He did not approach anything yet. He was measuring time. Ash slowed too, then stopped completely. It was subtle. Not a bark, not a pull on the leash, just refusal, his front paws planted, his head angled forward, ears alert but not raised. He was not afraid. He was certain. Caleb felt the moment register in his body before his mind caught up. He followed Ash's line of sight toward a cluster of freight cars farther down the siding. Older ones, pushed off to the side as if forgotten rather than abandoned. Their paint had dulled into the same muted color as the winter sky. "You're telling me something," Caleb said quietly. Ash did not look back. He held his position. Caleb exhaled slowly and stopped pretending momentum was a plan. Walking until exhaustion had always been an option. It just wasn't a good one tonight. He crouched briefly, pressing his gloved hand against the frozen ground. Hard. No give. If they stayed exposed, the cold would climb up fast. If they lay down, it would finish the job. The boxcars sat still in the distance, silent witnesses to his calculations. Caleb did not head toward them yet. He circled instead, moving along the perimeter, watching how the wind moved, where it broke, and where it cut clean. Years ago, this kind of decision would have been automatic. Now, it came with weight. Ash shifted once, adjusting his stance as the wind changed direction. Snow began to fall, not heavy yet, but persistent. The kind that promised more. Caleb straightened and nodded once, the decision settling not with relief, but resolve. "All right," he said. "We don't rush it." They moved closer to the freight line at an angle, staying aware of open sight lines. Caleb listened for movement, for voices, for anything that suggested presence. There was nothing. Just the sound of metal cooling and the distant hollow echo of a train horn miles away. One of the boxcars stood slightly apart from the others, its position awkward, as if it had been nudged there and forgotten. Caleb stopped short of it, studying the ground around the wheels. No fresh tracks, no disturbed snow. That mattered. He did not touch the door. Not yet. Ash stepped closer, sniffed once, then sat back on his haunches, waiting. Caleb rested his hand briefly on Ash's shoulder, grounding himself in the simple reality of contact. The cold was deepening now, the margin for error thinning. "We're not staying," Caleb said quietly, as much to himself as to the dog. "Just thinking." Ash remained still. Caleb looked at the sky. The clouds had lowered, swallowing what little light remained. The temperature was dropping faster than it should have, colder than forecast indeed. He took one step closer to the boxcar, not committing, just acknowledging the option. Shelter was not safety, but exposure was certainty. Ash rose smoothly and aligned himself beside Caleb, not leading, not following, ready. Caleb nodded again. Not agreement, acceptance of reality. They would not outrun this night. They would outlast it. And for the first time since leaving the boarding house, Caleb stopped measuring distance and began measuring time instead. The wind rose, carrying the smell of snow and steel. Ash did not move. Neither did Caleb. Not yet. The boxcar was colder inside than it had looked from the outside. Caleb stepped in slowly, letting his boots rest flat on the wooden floor without shifting his weight all at once, as if the space itself needed time to accept them. The air carried the smell of old timber, rust, and something faintly mineral, coal dust maybe, or iron ground down by years of vibration. Above him, the metal skin of the car answered the falling temperature with sharp, intermittent pops, each sound small but precise, like joints tightening under strain. He did not move right away. He stood still long enough for the noise in his chest to quiet, long enough for the instinct to flee to lose its urgency. Panic wasted heat. He had learned that lesson far from home, under different skies. Tonight, he needed calm more than speed. Ash followed him in and stopped just inside the door. The dog did not rush forward or explore. He turned once in a slow circle, then sat, his body angled toward Caleb, his back to the open space. His fur was thick along the shoulders and spine, darker there, lighter around the muzzle where age had begun to soften the black into gray. He was past his prime, but not diminished by it. His eyes were clear, steady, and patient in a way that suggested long familiarity with waiting things out. Caleb reached back and slid the door partway closed. Not sealed, just enough to blunt the wind without trapping the air. He tested it twice, adjusting the opening until the howl outside dropped to a lower, steadier sound. Control mattered, even partial control. The interior revealed itself gradually as his eyes adjusted. The boxcar was empty of cargo, but not of history. Scratches marked the walls at shoulder height. Old nails protruded where boards had once been secured more tightly. In one corner, someone had stacked planks deliberately, not randomly, their ends aligned with care that suggested intention rather than neglect. This place had not always been forgotten. It had been left. Caleb moved deeper inside, his movements economical, conserving energy. He ran a gloved hand along the wall and felt the grain beneath the cold. Wood held heat longer than metal. That mattered. The floor was raised off the ground by steel wheels and rails beneath. That mattered too. He filed the details away without comment. Ash rose and followed, stopping where Caleb stopped, mirroring his pauses without being taught. When Caleb crouched near the far wall, Ash lowered himself beside him, leaning just enough to make contact. The dog's warmth came through the layers slowly, but it came. That was when Caleb saw the paper. It was tucked between two boards near the corner, folded once, then folded again, as if someone had changed their mind about leaving it visible. The edges were torn, not cleanly, but with hesitation. Caleb hesitated too before picking it up. He had learned to respect messages left behind, especially ones that survived where people did not. The paper was yellowed and thin, the ink faded but legible. Some of the words had been scratched out hard enough to tear the fibers. If you're reading this, it means you stayed. The next line had been crossed through so aggressively that only fragments remained. I tried to leave, thought moving was safer. It wasn't. Below that, written smaller, steadier, this car kept me alive, not because it was warm, because I decided not to give it up. There was no name, no date, just the faint impression of a hand that had pressed too hard at the end, as if the writer had paused there for a long time. Caleb folded the paper carefully and placed it back where he found it. He did not need to read it twice. The message was not instruction. It was recognition. Ash watched him the entire time, head slightly tilted, as if gauging not the paper, but what it did to the man holding it. Someone else was here, Caleb said quietly. He was not speaking to the dog so much as anchoring the thought. They made it through a night like this. Ash shifted closer, his flank resting fully against Caleb's thigh now. He exhaled once, deep and slow. Caleb leaned back against the wall and let his weight settle. The cold seeped in immediately, aggressive where the boards thinned, but the wind no longer cut clean through. That was the difference between danger and death. Margins. He took inventory without ceremony, no fire, no light, limited insulation. Enough body heat between them to buy time. Not comfort, time. Ash curled tighter, positioning himself so that his chest faced the open space, his back toward Caleb, guarding even now. Caleb rested his forearm across the dog's shoulders, not restraining, just present. I won't let this be the end, Caleb said, so quietly that the words barely disturbed the air. He did not phrase it as hope. He did not dress it up. He did not promise rescue or warmth or safety. He promised survival. The night deepened. Outside, the snow thickened, shifting from light persistence to intent. The boxcar answered with more frequent pops as the metal contracted, the sounds echoing sharply in the enclosed space. Each noise could have been mistaken for movement. Caleb did not react. He counted breaths instead. Ash slept in intervals, never fully surrendering. Each time a stronger gust rattled the door, his ears lifted. Each time it passed, they settled again. Trust without negligence. At some point, Caleb felt a tremor start in his hands. He tucked them beneath his arms, pressing them against his ribs. The cold was not winning yet, but it was testing him. He shifted his legs carefully, creating a pocket where Ash's heat could collect, trapping it between them. The paper in the wall felt heavier now, as if its presence had altered the space. This boxcar was not just shelter, it was a decision someone else had already made and survived. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, not to sleep, to focus. I don't know how, he whispered, the admission barely a sound. But we'll get through this. Ash's tail thumped once against the floor. Not reassurance, agreement. The wind pressed harder against the steel. Snow packed into the gaps along the lower edge of the door, sealing them further without being asked. Nature, sometimes, made its own compromises. Caleb adjusted his position one final time, angling his body to block the draft as much as possible. He counted again. Breaths, heartbeats, minutes. He did not pray, he did not bargain. He made a choice and held to it. They would not die here, not tonight. The refund came late, and it came quietly. Caleb received it the way men receive things they no longer expect, without relief, without gratitude, only acknowledgement. The envelope had been slid halfway through the slot at the front office door, its corner already curled from damp air. Inside were a few folded bills and loose coins, counted twice by someone else and once more by him. It was not nothing, but it was not enough. By the time he stepped back outside, the snow had thickened into something heavier, more deliberate. It clung to his boots, packed itself into the seams, made every step louder than it should have been. The cold had settled deeper overnight, not sharp anymore, but dense, as if it had weight. The kind that seeped through bone and stayed there. Caleb stood for a moment near the edge of the rail yard, the envelope in his gloved hand, and ran the math without writing it down. Distance to the nearest hardware store that might still be open. Cost of coal, if they even sold it in small amounts. The odds of finding anything left on the shelves by the time he got there. The answer arrived before the calculation finished. Money could buy tools, it could buy fuel, but not tonight, not at this temperature, not with snow falling this fast. Ash stood beside him, nose low to the ground, tail still. The dog sniffed once at the envelope, then lost interest entirely. It was not food, it was not shelter, it was not useful. "All right," Caleb said quietly. "Then we do this the other way." They moved away from the storefronts and deeper into the margins of town, where people discarded what they didn't want to think about. The municipal dump sat half-buried beyond a line of scrub trees, its perimeter marked more by habit than fencing. The smell hit first: old paper, damp fabric, rust, and rot. But Ash filtered through it with ease, dismissing what didn't matter. Caleb's approach was slower, deliberate. He did not rummage, he assessed. Each object was weighed not by value but by function. A cracked plastic bin, useless. Water trapped cold faster than air. A length of frayed rope, still strong enough if doubled. He coiled it and set it aside. A warped pallet, half buried in snow, its slats split but intact in places. He dragged it free, testing each board with his boot. Ash ignored the sour scent of spoiled food and focused instead on texture and density. He pawed once at a pile of discarded burlap sacks, then gripped one gently and pulled. The fabric was stiff with age but dry. Caleb nodded and took it from him. "Good," he said. They worked in silence, breath fogging the air in steady rhythm. Newspapers, bundled and damp around the edges, but still salvageable at the core. A dented metal sheet with no sharp edges left. Scraps of insulation torn from some renovation project. Fiberglass shedding threads that caught on gloves. Caleb wrapped them carefully. At one point, Ash stopped and barked once. Not alarmed, just alert. A man stood near the far end of the dump, bent over a stack of broken furniture. He was older, late 60s maybe, with a hunched back and a knit cap pulled low over thinning gray hair. His beard was untrimmed but clean, his eyes sharp despite the cold. He glanced up, assessed Caleb and Ash quickly, then looked away again. No challenge, no greeting. Just acknowledgement. Caleb returned the courtesy by not approaching. By the time they carried their findings back toward the boxcar, the weight of the load had shifted from awkward to familiar. Ash dragged the burlap, his jaw clamped gently around the edge, adjusting when it caught on ice. Caleb balanced the pallet across his shoulder, the envelope of money tucked deep into his jacket where it could not tempt him into bad decisions. Inside the boxcar, the cold greeted them unchanged, but the space felt different now, not kinder, but responsive. Caleb leaned the pallet against the wall and began working without removing his gloves. He broke the boards free one by one, stacking them by length. Ash settled near the door again, watching the wind push snow into the gap. Caleb layered newspaper into the widest seams between boards, stuffing them loose to trap air, then pressed burlap over them to hold everything in place. He did not rush. Tight packing killed insulation. Air was the real barrier. The metal sheet went beneath the spot where he imagined a fire might someday sit. Not yet, but soon. He anchored it with stone chips scavenged earlier, wedging them tight. Each small improvement altered the equation. Ash shifted as the drafts changed, choosing the warmest pocket instinctively. When Caleb paused, hands stiffening, Ash pressed closer, sharing heat without fuss. By the time the light outside thinned to nothing but reflected snow, the boxcar held warmth, not comfort, but possibility. Caleb sat back against the wall, breathing carefully. The envelope lay beside him, unopened again. Money waited. Work did not. "We're not waiting," Caleb said softly, more to the space than to the dog. "We're building." Ash's tail thumped once, slow and deliberate. Outside, the storm gathered itself. Inside, they had begun. Caleb prepared the fire the way he prepared everything now, slowly, deliberately, with respect for consequences. Inside the boxcar, the air had changed from biting to brittle, the kind that snapped warmth the moment it appeared. He had chosen the spot the night before, measuring distance from the walls, from the seams he had stuffed with paper and burlap, from Ash's usual resting place near the door. The sheet of metal lay flat beneath a shallow ring of stones, each one selected for stability and lack of moisture. Wood burned wrong when it was rushed. Fire punished impatience. He knelt, testing each piece of kindling with his fingers. Dry enough, light enough. He arranged it not in a pile, but in a structure, leaving channels for air to move through. The newspapers came next, folded loosely, never packed tight. He tore them by hand instead of cutting, listening for the sound of fibers giving way. That sound told him more than sight ever could. The coal fragments weighted to the side, last to be fed, not first. Ash watched from a few feet away, head low, eyes steady. The dog had repositioned himself earlier, angling his body to block the draft without crowding the fire space. He understood boundaries. He always had. Caleb took out the matches and counted them. 3. He placed them on the metal sheet, spaced apart so he could see them without fumbling. He exhaled once, slow and controlled, then again. The cold had crept into his wrists despite the gloves, making his fingers less reliable than he liked. He removed the gloves anyway. Fire required touch. The first match struck clean, but went out too quickly. The flame stolen by a breath he hadn't realized he'd taken. The second flared, then sputtered as a gust slipped through the door seam. Caleb froze. He did not curse. He did not rush. He waited until the air settled again. His hand trembled as he reached for the third. It was not the cold alone that caused it. Memory had weight. The sharp smell of sulfur pulled something loose inside him. Images without edges, moments without sound, the sensation of heat arriving too fast and leaving too little behind. His chest tightened, the present thinned. Ash moved without command. He stepped forward and placed one paw gently on Caleb's wrist, not pressing hard, just enough to anchor. The dog's pad was warm, solid, real. His weight was familiar. Caleb stopped breathing long enough to notice it, then corrected himself. In, out. The tremor eased, not gone, but manageable. He met Ash's eyes and nodded once. Permission given. Support accepted. The match caught. This time, Caleb shielded the flame with his body, guiding it carefully to the paper. The fire took slowly, the way it should. Paper curled, then blackened, then surrendered to a low, steady burn. He fed it kindling in small increments, watching how the flame moved, how it leaned. When it was ready, he added coal, one piece at a time, listening for the change in sound that told him it had seated properly. Smoke rose, testing the space. Caleb adjusted the door a fraction, then wedged a loose board near the roofline, just enough to create draw. The smoke thinned and lifted. The fire steadied. Heat began to radiate outward, not dramatic, not immediate, but persistent. The metal walls answered slowly, absorbing and reflecting. The cold did not retreat so much as pause, surprised. Caleb sat back on his heels and let his hands hover near the warmth. Sensation returned in pins and needles, sharp but welcome. He flexed his fingers carefully, counting movement, confirming function. Ash approached the fire and lay down at a respectful distance, his chest angled toward the heat, his eyes half-lidded but alert. His tail thumped once against the floor, a quiet punctuation. They sat that way for a long time, the fire doing its work without demand. Outside, the storm gathered itself, the wind scraping against steel, snow whispering along the sides of the boxcar. Inside, the flame held. A sound came from beyond the door, footsteps crunching in snow, slow and uneven. Ash's ears lifted. He did not growl. He rose smoothly and positioned himself between the door and Caleb. Posture calm, but unmistakable. The door slid open a few inches, letting in a blade of cold and a sliver of a man's face. It was the older scavenger from the dump, the one with the knit cap and the untrimmed beard. Up close, he looked lean and weathered, his cheeks hollowed by age and exposure rather than hunger. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, but sharp. He held his hands where they could be seen. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. His voice was rough but measured, shaped by long use in open air. "Saw the smoke." Caleb rose slowly, keeping his body between the man and the fire without making it obvious. "You need something?" The man shook his head. "Just wanted to make sure you weren't burning the place down. This car's been standing longer than most folks remember." Ash watched the man's hands. The man noticed and smiled faintly. "Good dog," he said. "Knows his job?" Caleb studied him for a moment. "You know this place?" "Used to," the man said. "Name's Walter Hale. I kept an eye on these sidings back when the rail company still pretended they mattered. They don't pay anyone for it now." He glanced at the fire, approval flickering across his face. "You built it right." Caleb nodded once. "I built it to last the night." Walter shrugged. "Nights have a way of adding up." He stepped back, letting the door slide closed again. "Storm's getting worse. You'll want to keep feeding it slow. Coal'll crack if you rush it." "I know," Caleb said. Walter hesitated, then added, "If you need scrap, there's more south of here. Old crates, canvas, no one will miss them." He tipped his cap and turned away, footsteps fading into the snow. The door sealed again. The fire continued, indifferent to human plans. Caleb sat back down, closer now, feeling the heat settle into his core. The tremor was gone. In its place was something steadier, heavier, presence. "This time," he said quietly, not looking at Ash, "I'm not doing it alone." Ash did not answer. He did not need to. He shifted closer, his side pressing against Caleb's knee, sharing warmth without ceremony. The fire crackled softly, holding its shape. Caleb woke before the cold finished waking the world. It was not a sound that pulled him up, nor a thought, but a shift in pressure. The way the air settled heavier against the boxcar walls, the way metal stopped popping and began to hold its breath. The fire had burned down to a bed of coals exactly as he intended. Not dead, not hungry, waiting. He took a moment to study it before moving, reading the heat the way he once read terrain. A fire was a position. If you lost control of it, you lost everything that followed. He stood and stretched slowly, keeping his movements quiet. The space inside the boxcar was no longer chaos. It had shape now. The pallet boards formed a raised platform along the leeward wall. Insulation filled the seams in uneven but intentional layers. Tools and scavenged materials were stacked by function, not convenience. Nothing blocked the door. Nothing crowded the fire. The layout was defensive without being paranoid. He had learned long ago that order conserved energy, and energy was survival. Ash rose when Caleb did, not startled, just responsive. The dog had slept lightly, body curled where he could watch the door and feel the fire at the same time. His coat looked darker in the low light, the fur along his back dusted with fine ash from the night air. He shook once, quietly, then resumed his position near the opening, eyes tracking the narrow slice of snow beyond the door. He did not bark. He did not pace. He watched. Caleb fed the fire a single piece of coal and adjusted the venting board a fraction. Smoke lifted cleanly. Heat spread in a slow, controlled bloom. Satisfied, he sat on the edge of the platform and pulled on his boots, tightening the laces with care. The cold outside would punish mistakes. The cold inside rewarded discipline. When the wind rose again, it did so with intent. The temperature had dropped further than forecast, the kind of cold that did not announce itself with pain at first, only numbness. Caleb checked his hands, his ears, Ash's paws. Everything was still good. They had margin, not comfort, but margin. A sound reached them through the wind, footsteps again, heavier this time, deliberate. Ash's posture changed immediately. He stood, head level, body aligned with the door. Still no sound from him. No warning given to someone who already knew where he was going. The door slid open several inches, then stopped. A man stood outside, framed by blowing snow and gray morning light. He was tall, with a broad frame that age had not softened so much as rearranged. His shoulders sloped slightly, as if from years of carrying weight that never truly set down. A thick coat hung from him, patched and repatched, its collar turned up against the cold. His beard was full and white, trimmed unevenly, his face cut with deep lines that suggested both weather and patience. His eyes were dark and observant, the kind that measured before judging. He did not step inside. "You the one who lit the fire?" he asked. Caleb stood, placing himself between the man and the interior without making it obvious. "Yes." The man nodded once. "Name's Thomas Reed. I keep an eye on this stretch when I can." His gaze moved past Caleb, taking in the fire ring, the insulation, the clear venting path. He noted Ash last, lingering there a moment longer. "Dogs trained?" "Yes." Reed exhaled, slow, visible. "Good. Means you're not reckless." Ash met the man's stare without challenge. Reed's mouth twitched, almost a smile, then settled back into neutrality. "You know this is rail property," Reed said, not unkindly but firmly. "Company doesn't like surprises." Caleb nodded. "I know. You planning to stay?" "Until the storm breaks." Reed studied him again, this time longer. He crouched slightly, resting a gloved hand on his knee, testing the ground. "You've got clearance around the fire, no charring on the boards, airflow's clean." He looked back up. "You built this like you intend to wake up tomorrow." Caleb did not answer that. He didn't need to. Reed straightened. "I've seen folks try to shelter in these cars before. Most don't last the night. Panic, bad fires, poor choices." He glanced toward the open yard, where the wind scoured the tracks clean in uneven lines. "This kind of cold doesn't forgive." "No," Caleb said. "It doesn't." Reed was quiet for a moment, the wind filling the space between them. Then he nodded again, sharper this time. "All right. You can stay through the storm." He raised a hand slightly before Caleb could speak. "Not because I feel sorry for you. Because you're keeping the place safe. That matters." Caleb felt something ease in his chest, not relief, but acknowledgement. "Thank you." Reed shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just don't make me regret it." He glanced at Ash once more. "He'll tell you before I do if you mess up." Ash's tail moved once, barely. Reed stepped back and slid the door closed to its previous position, careful not to disrupt the airflow. "I'll check back when the weather breaks. If you're still standing, we'll talk then." When he was gone, the silence returned, heavier but cleaner. Caleb sat down slowly and let his breath even out. Permission was not safety, but it bought time. Time to endure, time to prove something. He adjusted the fire again, minimal, precise. Ash resumed his watch, posture unchanged. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the boxcar, the night held. This was not mercy. This was discipline recognized. The storm arrived without drama, which made it worse. There was no single moment when it announced itself, no clean line between before and after. The wind simply grew heavier, its voice lowering into something constant and forceful, as if the air itself had decided to move the town somewhere else. Snow followed not in flakes, but in sheets, erasing edges, swallowing distance. By mid-morning, the rail yard was no longer a place so much as a white field, broken only by dark shapes that refused to disappear. Inside the boxcar, the fire held, not bright, not triumphant. It worked the way it was meant to, steady, controlled, consuming exactly what it needed, and nothing more. Caleb fed it with care, counting the minutes between additions, listening to how the coal answered the heat. Too much, and the fire would choke. Too little, and the cold would begin to negotiate again. Ash remained near the door, shifting only when the draft changed, Snow had begun to seal the lower gap completely now, turning the boxcar into something closer to a shelter than a container. The dog tested the air with his nose, then withdrew, his ears flicking once as a distant sound cut through the wind. Caleb heard it a moment later. Knuckles on metal, not loud, not desperate, just persistent enough to carry. He did not move right away. The sound came again, followed by a voice muffled by the storm. "Hello?" Ash turned his head toward Caleb, then back to the door. He did not bark. He did not growl. He waited. Caleb stood slowly, his body remembering other doors, other nights. He felt the old instinct rise, the one that said scarcity required exclusion, that safety meant tightening the circle until no one else fit inside it. That instinct had kept him alive once. It had also left him alone. The knocking came a third time, weaker now. Caleb slid the door open just enough to see. A man stood there, hunched against the wind, his coat thin and soaked through. He was in his early 40s, with a narrow face and sharp cheekbones that made him look older than he was. His beard was patchy, uneven, as if he had tried and failed to grow it out. One glove was missing, his bare hand red and stiff with cold. "I heard there was a fire," the man said, his voice shaking more from fatigue than fear. Didn't know where else to go. Caleb studied him without comment. No bag, no visible weapon. Just exhaustion layered over bad decisions. Behind him, shapes moved in the white. Two more figures approached slowly, helping a third between them. A woman and a teenage boy, both bundled in mismatched clothing, scarves pulled high over their mouths. The woman was short and broad-shouldered, her hair hidden beneath a knit cap, her eyes alert despite the cold. The boy leaned heavily on her, favoring one leg, his movements careful. "We're not staying long," the woman called out, raising her voice against the wind. "Just until it eases." Caleb felt something tighten behind his ribs. These were not strangers to him, not truly. He had passed them in town before, shared sidewalks, exchanged nods that meant nothing until they suddenly meant everything. Ash stepped forward and looked out at them, then back at Caleb. His expression did not change, he offered no direction, he did not plead. The choice was not his to make. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, just long enough to remember a hallway with peeling paint, a door that had closed on him while someone else counted money behind it. He remembered how quiet that moment had been, how final. When he opened his eyes again, the storm pressed closer, as if listening. "Come in," he said. The words felt heavier than they should have. Not because they were wrong, but because they carried consequence. The first man stepped inside, his shoulders sagging as the wind lost its grip on him. The woman followed, guiding the boy carefully over the threshold. Snow fell from them in clumps, melting instantly on the warmer floor. The space tightened, not dangerously, but enough to be felt. Caleb moved without speaking, shifting the pallet boards, adjusting the insulation where bodies now blocked airflow. He repositioned the fire slightly, feeding it a fraction more fuel. Heat redistributed. The system adapted. Ash circled once, then lay down near the boy, his body angled to share warmth. The boy's breathing slowed almost immediately. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice rough. Up close, she looked older than Caleb had thought. Lines etched deep around her eyes and mouth. Her skin was weathered, her hands calloused. She carried herself like someone used to holding things together until they broke. "Name's Marlene. This is my son, Jacob." Caleb nodded. "Caleb." The man without the glove cleared his throat. "Evan," he said. "I used to work maintenance. Lost my place last month." Caleb did not ask how. Everyone had a version of that story. They settled into silence, the kind shaped by shared discomfort rather than trust. Outside, the storm intensified, the wind hammering the boxcar in steady waves. Inside, the fire held its ground, now tasked with more than it had been designed for. At one point, Jacob stirred and winced, clutching his leg. Ash lifted his head and nudged him gently, then rested his chin against the boy's knee. Jacob laughed softly, surprised by the sound. "Guess he likes you," Marlene said. "He's selective," Caleb replied. Hours passed. No one spoke much. They did not need to. Survival narrowed the conversation down to essentials. When the wind finally began to ease, It did so unevenly, backing off in increments rather than retreating all at once. Snow continued to fall, but the violence had passed. The town beyond the boxcar remained buried, quiet in a way that suggested damage still being counted. Evans stood and pulled on his coat, flexing his stiff fingers. "We should go," he said, "before we overstay." Caleb nodded. "Be careful." Marlene hesitated at the door, then turned back. "You could have said no," she said. "Yes," Caleb replied. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once and stepped out into the cold. When the door closed again, the boxcar felt larger and emptier than before. The fire burned lower, returning to its original rhythm. Ash stood and shook off stray snow, then returned to his post. Caleb sat down slowly, the weight of the day settling into him. He had opened the door. He had survived the memory. Outside, the storm had not spared anyone. Inside, a choice had. The railcar filled in layers, not all at once. People arrived in uneven clusters as the storm refused to fully loosen its grip, each new knock carrying the same question, wrapped in different voices. By late afternoon, the interior had changed again, no longer defined by empty space, but by proximity. Bodies close enough that breath became visible even inside, fogging the air in soft bursts that rose and vanished near the ceiling. Coats steamed, boots shed snow. Fear brushed against fear and found no room to retreat. Caleb moved through it without announcement. He shifted boards, cleared paths, widened a narrow channel near the door so cold air could slip past without colliding with the fire. He did not raise his voice. He did not issue commands. He pointed, lifted, repositioned. When someone hesitated, he filled the gap himself. The space learned him quickly. Ash adapted faster. He chose a place just off-center, where the air moved but did not cut, where he could see the door and the fire at the same time. His body became a fixed reference point. People stepped around him without being told. A man stumbled and nearly fell. Ash rose and steadied the moment by simply standing where panic wanted to rush. The dog did not bark. He did not bare teeth. He breathed. A woman near the wall began to shake uncontrollably. Her hands clutched tight around her elbows. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled into a low knot that had come loose in the storm. Her face was pale beneath windburn, freckles stark against the cold. She tried to slow her breathing and failed. The space felt smaller because of it. Caleb noticed and approached without hurry. He crouched, placed a folded burlap sack around her shoulders, and adjusted it until the fabric rested evenly. He did not ask her name. He did not tell her to calm down. He sat beside her and mirrored a slower rhythm with his own breath until her shaking found something else to follow. She nodded once, embarrassed but relieved, and leaned back against the wall. Near the door, two men argued in low, clipped tones over space that did not exist. One was tall and thin, his jaw sharp, his beard trimmed too carefully for someone who had slept outside the night before. The other was shorter and heavier, his coat torn at the elbow, his eyes darting constantly. The words sharpened, shoulders rose. Ash stood. Not between them, just close enough that both men had to register him. His presence cut across the argument like a held note. The taller man glanced down, then away. The shorter man swallowed and shifted his weight. The words faded without conclusion. The fire cracked softly, holding its line. Heat moved outward in a steady pattern. Caleb fed it as needed, not more, not less. He adjusted the vent when smoke thickened and slid it back when the draw improved. The system worked because it was treated like one. As evening deepened, a sudden cry broke the rhythm. A man near the far wall had panicked, convinced the fire was choking him. He staggered forward, arms flailing, knocking into others. Someone shouted. The railcar lurched emotionally, the kind of collective intake that precedes collapse. Ash reached the man first. He stepped into the man's path and planted himself, solid and immovable, eyes level, posture calm. The man stumbled to a stop, breath hitching, confusion breaking through fear. Ash did nothing else. He waited. Caleb arrived a second later and guided the man down to a seated position away from the fire. He adjusted the vent again, opening the door a fraction more until fresh air threaded through the space. The smoke thinned, the man's breathing slowed. The crisis passed without spectacle. No one applauded, no one thanked anyone. Trust formed anyway. Later, when the storm outside quieted to a relentless whisper, the railcar held more than bodies. It held a fragile order. People took turns near the fire. They shared scraps without negotiation. When someone slept, another watched the door. Caleb did not assign roles. They emerged. A boy, 12 or 13, with a mop of blonde hair and a coat several sizes too big, sat near Ash and traced patterns in the frost on the wall. Ash tolerated the contact, shifting only when the boy leaned too heavily. The boy smiled and corrected himself. Caleb watched from the edge, the weight of the space pressing on him in a different way now. This was not a position he had intended to hold. It had found him anyway. Near midnight, a woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair approached him. She was tall and angular, her face composed even in exhaustion. Her hands were steady. "This place," she said quietly, "it's holding." Caleb nodded. "Because everyone's helping." She studied him a moment longer. "That's not an accident." When the storm finally began to release the town, it did so reluctantly. Snow continued to fall, but the wind withdrew, leaving behind a silence that rang. One by one, people prepared to leave. They gathered their things carefully, as if the railcar might notice carelessness now. They did not leave all at once. They left in ones and twos, nodding, murmuring thanks that felt less like gratitude and more like recognition. The space emptied gradually, returning to its earlier shape but not its earlier meaning. Ash remained where he was until the last person stepped out. Then he rose, stretched, and shook, sending a fine cloud of ash and frost into the air. Caleb fed the fire one final time and sat down heavily. His hands ached, his shoulders burned. The railcar creaked as it cooled, settling into itself again. It had not saved everyone from the storm, but it had kept them alive long enough to choose what came next. Morning came without ceremony. The storm had withdrawn during the night, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the wind ever had. Snow lay packed and sculpted by hours of force, its surface hardened into ridges and drifts that caught the pale light. The rail yard looked altered but intact, as if tested and found worthy of remaining. Caleb stood just outside the boxcar and let the cold reach him fully. It was still brutal, still capable of harm, but it no longer carried the same threat. The fire behind him had burned low and steady through the night, never flaring, never failing. The railcar had held, not just structure, but order. Ash stepped out beside him and shook the snow from his coat. He moved with the ease of something that had done its job and was ready to do it again if asked. His eyes scanned the yard, alert but unhurried. Tracks crunched in the distance. Caleb turned as Thomas Reed approached along the cleared edge of the siding. The older man looked different in daylight. Taller than he had seemed in the storm, his frame lean but solid beneath a heavy coat, worn thin at the elbows. His beard was neatly trimmed now, white against weathered skin the color of old leather. His eyes were clear and steady, the kind that had watched long winters come and go without complaint. He stopped several feet away, taking in the scene before saying a word. The cleared path near the door, the intact roofline, the controlled smoke rising in a thin column. His gaze lingered on details most people missed. "You kept it standing," Reed said finally. Caleb nodded. "It kept us standing." Reed's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. He stepped closer and rested a gloved hand against the side of the rail car, feeling the residual warmth through the steel. "Most folks leave damage when they're desperate," he said. "They take more than they can manage, burn too hot, break things they'll need later." He looked at Caleb again, sharper now. "You didn't." "I wasn't alone," Caleb said, glancing at Ash. Ash sat down at his side, posture easy but attentive. Reed followed the look and nodded. "No, you weren't." For a moment, neither man spoke. The quiet was not awkward. It was evaluative, the kind that decided things without argument. "I won't be doing this much longer," Reed said at last. "Watching these sidings. Company hasn't paid for a caretaker in years. They just stopped asking. I kept coming because someone had to." Caleb waited. He had learned not to fill silence meant for truth. "I'm tired," Reed continued. Not the kind you sleep off. The kind that comes from knowing every weak point and realizing you don't have the strength to cover them all anymore. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded set of papers, edges soft with use. Not a contract, a ledger, handwritten notes, schedules, keys tied together with a length of cord. I saw how you set the fire, Reed said. How you move people. How nothing escalated unless it had to. His eyes held Caleb's. You've done this before. Not trains, people. Caleb felt the weight of that observation settle. A long time ago. Doesn't matter, Reed replied. Discipline doesn't forget. He held out the keys. This isn't ownership, Reed said plainly. It's responsibility, keeping the place safe, reporting damage when it matters, making sure no one dies because something got ignored. Caleb did not reach for them right away. He looked back at the rail car, at the packed snow, at the marks left by many feet now already filling in. If I say yes, he said, this stops being temporary. That's the point, Reed said. Caleb thought of the nights spent measuring time instead of distance, of holding heat steady instead of chasing it, of people who had come and gone, leaving behind something quieter than gratitude. Ash shifted and lay down directly in front of the boxcar door, his body aligned squarely with the opening, not blocking it, guarding it. Reed noticed and let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Dogs already accepted the post. Caleb reached out and took the keys. They were cold, heavier than expected. All right, he said. Reed nodded once, satisfied. I'll come by from time to time, make sure things are still right, but this stretch is yours now. He paused, then added, You did good work in a bad storm. That tells me enough. When Reed left, his footsteps moved away without urgency. The rail yard felt different again, not emptier, but claimed. Caleb stood there for a long moment, the keys resting in his palm. No rush followed, no fear of being asked to leave. The space held him the way it hadn't before. Ash remained at the door, eyes half closed, breathing slow. Caleb looked down at him and exhaled, something loosening that had been tight for years. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't passing through. He was keeping watch. Spring did not arrive all at once. It never did here. It crept in cautiously, testing the ground the way a careful animal tests ice. Snow receded in patches rather than retreating, revealing gravel, rusted steel, and the scars left behind by the storm. The rail yard smelled different now, wet metal, thawing earth, smoke that no longer meant emergency. Caleb worked with the patience of someone no longer racing the clock. Each morning, he walked the length of the siding, checking bolts, listening to the language of steel under temperature change. He reinforced the roofline where wind had found a weakness, added a second layer of insulation where condensation lingered too long. Nothing flashy, nothing rushed. He built the way he had learned to survive, assuming the next season would be harder than the last. Ash followed him everywhere, moving freely now, no longer bound to a single guarding position. His coat thickened and shed in cycles, the gray around his muzzle catching more light than before. He still chose the doorway when night came, settling there by instinct, but his body no longer carried the tension of constant vigilance. The place had learned its own rhythm. People began to appear again, not during storms, not out of desperation. They came in daylight, hesitant at first, standing just beyond the edge of the siding, as if unsure whether the rail car still belonged to silence. Some Caleb recognized, others he did not. Marlene returned one afternoon with Jacob, the boy walking more steadily now, his limp reduced to caution rather than pain. She carried a crate of salvage tools and set it down without ceremony. Figured you could use these, she said. If not, I'll take them back. Caleb nodded and thanked her. She stayed to help reinforce a door brace, working efficiently, her hands sure. Jacob sat near Ash, sketching the rail car in a battered notebook, occasionally stopping to ask questions Ash ignored with dignity. Evan showed up a week later, cleaner than before, beard trimmed unevenly but intentionally this time. He brought scrap wood and stayed long enough to help stack it. He didn't ask to sleep there. He didn't need to. Others followed. A woman with paint-stained gloves repaired peeling warning signs. An older man with arthritic hands sharpened tools and left them neatly arranged. No one asked for permission. No one assumed entitlement. They offered work, and Caleb accepted it when it made sense. The railcar changed, not in appearance so much as in meaning. It became a place where people stopped by, lingered, then moved on, carrying something steadier than when they arrived. One afternoon, a black SUV pulled up near the edge of the yard, its tires crunching where no one else drove. A man stepped out wearing a tailored coat that looked expensive even at a distance. His hair was dark, neatly cut, his face clean-shaven and confident. He smiled easily as he approached, hands open, voice smooth. "I'm representing an investment group," he said. "This area is under review. There's potential here." He gestured toward the rail car. "We'd be interested in acquiring the structure. Fair price. Cash." Caleb listened without interruption. He had heard versions of this pitch before, always delivered with the same optimism that assumed everything could be measured and exchanged. When the man finished, Caleb shook his head. "It's not for sale." The man blinked, surprised. "Everyone has a number." Caleb glanced back at the rail car, at the patched steel, the layered work of many hands. Ash lay in the doorway, eyes half closed, unbothered. "Not this," Caleb said. The man hesitated, recalibrated, then nodded politely. "If you change your mind, I won't." The SUV left without drama, disappearing back into the grid of town. That evening, Caleb sat on the rail outside the boxcar and watched the light fade. He thought about the boarding house, the clipboard, the way replacement had once felt inevitable. That fear no longer found purchase. This place had not been given to him. It had been built, maintained, shared. It could not be taken without effort, and even then, the meaning would remain elsewhere. Ash rose and settled beside him, leaning in until their shoulders touched. Caleb rested his hand on the dog's back and felt the slow, even breath beneath his palm. "I'm not passing through anymore," he said quietly. Ash did not respond. He didn't need to. As night settled over the rail yard, the boxcar stood steady, its light warm but restrained. People came and went. Seasons would change. Winters would return. But the place held. And so did they. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they arrive as endurance, as one person refusing to give up on another, as a hand steadying a fire in the cold, or a dog choosing to stay by a door all night. This story is not about a rail car. It's about what happens when dignity survives hardship, and when community forms without being asked. When people stop waiting to be saved and instead become shelter for one another. Many of us know what it feels like to be pushed aside, replaced, or forgotten. But faith reminds us that no season of loss is final. God often works quietly, rebuilding lives through small acts of courage, discipline, and love. What looks abandoned may simply be waiting for the right hands to restore it. If you are walking through a difficult season, may this story remind you, you are not invisible. You are not finished. And sometimes the miracle you're praying for begins with one faithful step forward. May God bless you with strength, peace, and unexpected kindness this week. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to support our channel. Comment "truth and healing" to let us know you're watching, and tell us where you're watching from. You never know who might need this story today.